First, we enable course requests using the enable course function, and we also use Gorilla Mux to handle post requests from the front end. The post requests are then appropriately sent to the correct handler in main. Our first handler is post handler, which receives a JSON object of the latitude and longitude, which is the origin or the user's location. It sends a request to the Places API, which returns a list of nearby coffee shops. The post handler then returns the same data. Next, we have the login handler, which receives a JSON object of a username and password. This handler requires a text file called usernames.txt. Here's what a file could look like. Checks if a user exists within it using a helper function called checkUser and returns the appropriate status. Create handler receives a username and password and adds the user to the text file if they don't already exist using the add user helper function. It then returns the appropriate status. We now have a request handler that receives a username and password and returns all the coffee shops the user has favorited using the helper function return user data. This requires a text file called users.txt, which contains all favorited coffee shops of all users. This is what it can look like. The favorite handler gets a username and the place ID, name, and photo link of a coffee shop. It stores these in users.txt using add favorite and then returns the appropriate status. The last handler is called directions handler, and it receives a URL which points to the Google Maps directions API. The URL contains origin and destination coordinates, which the API uses to construct directions. The handler sends a request to this URL and receives the directions from origin to destination. It then returns this data to its caller. We lastly have the few helper functions I mentioned earlier. Add favorite adds a newly favorited coffee shop to users.txt. Return user data returns a user's favorite coffee shops. Check user checks if a user exists, and add user adds a new user to usernames.txt.